Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for joining. My name is Liz Pena. I'm a marketing specialist here at Verity IT. Today's webinar, we're covering the ever-evolving topic of ransomware. Ransomware's emergence in the past decade has taken many twists and turns, from double extortion techniques to attacks against critical infrastructure. It has been a huge wake-up call to all organizations, but especially those without adequate security postures. Today, we are joined by Mike DePalma at Datto to discuss the impact of ransomware further. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
All right, thank you so much. So my name's Mike DePalma. I'm the VP of Business Development at Datto. So we are a backup disaster recovery company. We're based up in Norwalk, Connecticut. So we're about 40 miles east of Manhattan. And we've been talking about ransomware out in the industry since I've been here. I've been here 8 years. And it's one of those topics where, 7, 8 years ago, I'd give presentations and people would be kind of looking at their phones, not really paying attention. Maybe they saw a story somewhere or a large organization that had been hit. As the years have gone on, this has honestly become the #1 topic that people are requesting because it has truly become a worldwide epidemic. It's the largest and the easiest way that these criminals are making money and attacking businesses. And what's interesting about ransomware is it's been around for over 30 years. The first known attack was all the way back in 1989. The ask was for a whopping $189. And you move forward into where we are now, you look at some of the numbers from 2021, we're looking at a multi-billion-dollar year industry. I saw a stat that if you were to look at the cyber criminal space as in its totality, it would be the 9th largest economy in the world, just ahead of Canada and Brazil. That's the kind of money that's out there for these criminals to be made. And what they're seeing is that it's a lot easier for them to attack the small to medium-sized business community as it is to attack the large guys. And you see the stories in the paper when, the city of Baltimore gets hit or the Colonial Pipeline and those type of attacks. And those are sensational stories that make the news. But the vast majority of these attacks are happening at the smaller level because they know there's a higher success rate of them getting through. And there's a higher success rate that the smaller businesses will actually pay the ransom. When the city of Baltimore gets hit, it's a great, huge story, and they get a lot of press on the, on the criminal side, and that's all great. But the chances are the city of Baltimore is never going to make that payment. The city of Baltimore can't go out of business. They could always just go off and sell, muni bonds or whatever they have to do. A small business cannot float that, and that's why the criminals are finding so much success in that space. And so when you look at the ransomware, as a whole, there's a couple things you got to really look at. First and foremost is what is that real impact to your business when you're hit? Most people have heard the phrase ransomware, maybe understand a little bit about what it is, but a lot of times, a lot of business owners that I talk to will say, okay, well, we're going to put everything in place that we can to prevent these attacks. But if it does happen, worst case scenario, what are they going to ask me for? A few $1,000s. I'll just open a Bitcoin account, pay that money, and I'll be fine. And again, this is the reason why these criminals are so successful is because so much of the small business, leadership's landscape looks at it this way. And they say, okay, well, if you're just going to give me money, then I'll just keep attacking you. So there's the hard cost to it, which would obviously be, here's the money I have to pay to get my data back. But the bigger cost across the board is always those soft costs, the time in which it takes you to get all of your data back and get all of your systems up and running. Are you dealing with an honest business transactor? Probably not. They're going to probably say, hey, it's $5,000. Pay me $5,000. Well, thanks for the down payment. And, if you give me another $5,000, I'll actually unlock your data. Or they'll say, okay, great. And then they'll leave that virus dormant on your network so that they could pop up again and say, well, I know this person paid me once. I know I can get money again. But then there's also the reputational risk to all of this and the loss of clients, the loss of prospective clients. There's a lot of ripple effects, and it's those soft costs that really is what are impacting the business community. And what we're seeing here is, like I mentioned, it's been around for about 30 years. So why have we seen this huge explosion over the last 5, 6 years, especially? Well, there's a couple of different reasons. One, obviously now businesses are so tied to their data. Whereas, 20 years ago, if a business was going to be attacked, the criminal would probably want to do some reconnaissance ahead of time and saying, hey, if I'm going to spend some time infiltrating this company's network, I'm going to make sure there's some really valuable information there that I can go and sell on the dark web or hold for hostage and those types of things. What ransomware gave the criminals the ability to do is say, hey, I don't really care what that data is. I don't care if it's valuable to me. I don't care if it's worth a single penny for me on the dark web. What I do know is now, because we're so tied to our technology, I know that it doesn't matter if you're a single person nonprofit or a large Fortune 500 company, you've got no other recourse but to pay because you can't operate without your data. And so it allowed them to really cast this huge net. And we've seen even over the last several years, it even accelerate even more as we are living this work from anywhere kind of environment. You need access to your data wherever you may be physically sitting. And the criminals know that. And they know that every minute costs money. But the other big piece of this, and the reason why we've seen such an explosion, was the rise in cryptocurrencies. The rise in Bitcoin and Ethereum and all these other cryptocurrencies that we've seen, because the criminals finally figured out about 5-6 years ago that they had this very easy delivery system with ransomware, which typically comes in a phishing email. And we'll go through that in a minute. But they had a problem of, okay, well, how am I going to ask for the money? Is it going to be an ACH payment? Is it going to be a credit card payment? Those could all be reversed or tracked back to me. Once the criminals realize, hey, I can marry this easy delivery system with this online anonymous cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, and I know once that money leaves your account and comes over to mine, you're never getting it back, and there's very little chance I'll ever be caught. Then we started seeing this huge explosion. So we all have the friend who will brag to you at the dinner table that they bought in Bitcoin when it was $5,000 and now they're millionaires, and that's all great. Everybody's got one of those stories. But the reality is these criminals have been accumulating all of these cryptocurrencies and all the different forms that they have when a Bitcoin was worth $100, $200. So now when you think of when Bitcoin peaks at $60,000 and your friend is bragging to you about all the money they made, the criminals are making hundreds of millions of dollars in a day worth of increase in those costs because they've been accumulating it at such a rapid rate over the last decade or so. And so we've seen that how sophisticated these folks are. And then it's gotten to the point where we hear the phrase ransomware as a service is something we've been talking about, but it really came to light really with the pipeline attack last year, is that this is a corporate structure that we're up against now. There are places you can go on the dark web right now, and it's almost like a franchisee program. The folks that are creating these viruses are typically not the folks that are actually delivering the virus itself. They're just the developers. They're the brains behind the whole operation. And then you, as a salesperson, can go up and become a franchisee and says, okay, I'm now going to be part of CryptoLocker or any of the, any of these types of things that are out there, and you can go and do that. And so there is this corporate structure to this whole thing. There are different layers. There's even another layer below that if you buy into some of these ransomware as a service, there's tech support. And it sounds, contrarian, but really what that means is you hit somebody with a ransomware attack, they might not know how to set up a Bitcoin account. So let me just jump in and I'll walk you right through how to set up a Bitcoin account so you can get your money over to me as quick as possible. It's astonishing the sophistication that these guys are going, the lengths these guys are going to really structure this like it's any other business. There are people right now putting a tie on, heading out to work, and they're going to sit at a desk and they're going to just attack as many businesses as possible. And at the end of the day, they're going to punch out, they're going to go home, have dinner with their families, and it's a job like anything else. And we really have to view it this way. It's important so that we know that we're not against the guy in his basement who doesn't want to get a real job or just wants to go on, to the little chat forums and brag, hey, did you see that story? That was me. This is a way of life for a lot of people. This is a way to make a living. And when we look at what these ransomware attacks are doing, let's just start with what we mean by ransomware in and of itself. Because yes, there's different variants of it, but for the most part, all of these variants, what they're doing is they're just encrypting all of your data. They're holding it hostage. They're locking it up and they're holding the key. And they're saying, you can have this key for a certain amount of money. And we've even seen some scarier ones where it's like, okay, well, for $200 a month, I could protect you and you'll never get it. And it's an ongoing kind of monthly recurring model. These are the type of things we're after. But the way they're getting in really hasn't changed. It hasn't changed, and it hasn't needed to change because the model has been working so well. The vast majority of these attacks are coming through via a spam email. And they've gotten very, very good at these spam emails. They're no longer the I'm your long lost uncle, send me some money and I'll make you a millionaire in your will. No, this is going to be an email that looks like it comes from every other email within your inbox. And they're very good. We all get them. I get them all the time from Verizon, or we saw them a lot during the pandemic. Your FedEx package has arrived. How many FedEx packages were sitting outside your door every day? You might not remember what you ordered. or what your spouse ordered, and you go and you click on this link to find, the tracking number, and what you've done is just downloaded, a ransomware virus. And so they're very, very good at this. We all have to, at this point, just freely give a lot of information about ourselves and our business freely on the web in order just to do business. You can go find me on LinkedIn and find out where I went to school, how long I've been at Datto, where I worked previous. So now if I'm going to send an email out, it's going to look like every other email that I get, because they're going to send it from an alumni association from my college, or from a previous employer, from somebody that they know that I work with. And so what they're trying to do is do it on such a massive scale that, again, when you look at the large attacks that we see in the news, there's a lot of work behind the scenes that's going to get into you getting through a governmental agency or something like that. This is months and months of research and months of planning and all those different types of things. So yes, if you are to get through and you hit a company like the Colonial Pipeline, you might get a $5 million payout. But you're going to have a lesser of a chance of getting through. With what the business model that most of these criminals are going with is the singles hitter style, where you're just going to try to attack thousands of businesses every single day. Again, knowing you're going to have a higher success rate of getting through and a higher success rate of getting paid. So they're going to try to send a spam that goes out, hopefully bypasses those filters. It's going to look like something that you've seen so that you click on it. And when you do that, it's either going to typically be in some sort of attachment, or it's going to be in a hyperlink that's going to lead you to a nefarious site. And when you talk about how opportunistic these folks are, we saw it at the pandemic, the very start of the pandemic. Within days, emails were coming out that looked exactly like every email you were getting from the World Health Organization or the CDC. Click here for cases in your area. We see it. They're very opportunistic. We've seen with supply chain stuff right now. They're going and they're attacking folks within supply chain. We will see, right? We're coming up on the end of the quarter. We will see, if you're a salesperson, believe me, they're gonna try to send, hey, I need this invoice processed ASAP. And you're a sales rep and you're trying to hit your sales quota or whatever that is, you're gonna want to, and your inbox is flooded because it's the end of the quarter. If you're in HR, they know that. They will scour the job boards and say, okay, this company is hiring for this position. They're probably getting flooded with resumes. Well, why would mine look any different? So I'll submit a resume. Within that attachment is going to be an executable attachment that's now going to get my way into your system. And so that's what they're trying to do. It's a simple model. And again, it doesn't have to change, because we in the business community are not doing enough right now to just slow down this low-hanging fruit. We did a survey. We do a ransomware survey every year, and we did one last year. And we talked to businesses about how concerned they were. And this was middle of the pandemic. We saw an uptick in cyber attacks. Only 3 in 10 business owners were highly concerned about ransomware and similar threats. 7 in 10 businesses were not highly concerned about this multi-billion-dollar a year industry. The criminals know that, why would I have to change anything? My model's working. Nobody on the business community is doing anything to stop me. So it's just a numbers game. I can tell you, when we get our studies back from 2022, it's going to be a banner year for the criminals, because we've seen what they've been doing. And then once they get into these systems, a lot of different things can happen. So there's the initial compromise, but what they typically want to do is they don't want to get in and immediately detonate that ransomware so a scary red screen pops up and says, hey, pay me my ransom. While they're in there, they're going to poke around and see what they can get their hands on. The first thing they're going to do is they're going to go try to find your backup, so that if you do say, okay, well, I'm going to restore from my backup, they're going to say, well, I've encrypted this as well. But they're also going to go in and see what kind of other systems they can get involved in. They're going to see who has what privileges. And we'll get into that in a little bit, but make sure that everybody in your organization has access to all the tools they need, but that they only have access to the tools they need. What we saw during the pandemic was, a lot of these SaaS applications, software as a service applications, were being implemented, and they were great. They were, what kept the economy alive, being able to work remotely. And those are all great. But in the meantime, because everything was so chaotic, a lot of businesses just carte blanche gave everyone admin access. That is a golden ticket to a criminal, because if they can now infiltrate a user who has admin access to everything, well, now they can get their hands into everything that they want. And so they can lay dormant for a long time. And maybe then they can steal, or they could compromise, a domain and try to do some other, business email compromise type tricks while they're in there. But all of this stuff is happening. So again, it's not as immediate as you're going to click this executable file and all of a sudden the scary red screen is going to pop up. There are some viruses that do that, and it's just a numbers game, and they want to get out of there with $400, and they're going to move on to the next one. But for the most part, they're seeing that there's a lot of value in trying to get their hands in as many things as possible. So that's what they will do. And if you want to look at how easy these attacks are, we go in Mark Company, we go out and do all the industry events, all the technology trade shows. And a couple of years ago, we did a little experiment. And I was a little hesitant that this was going to work, but I could tell you it's one organization. They have 8 different locations throughout the year. So 2 per quarter. We did it. We hosted all, we were sponsors at all of them. And we did an experiment. What we would do is at every one of these events, and there's typically, 200 or so IT, outsourced IT providers there, and all the vendors, we all get up and do our song and dance. But what we would do is we'd hire a local model from whatever city we were in. So we were in Miami, call a local modeling agency, hire a model for 1 hour of their time, and we would have a bowl full of USB sticks. And those USB sticks said Inverse Technologies on them. It was a made-up company. We did just pull it out of thin air. This woman would walk around with an Inverse Technologies golf shirt on, and she'd hand out these USB sticks during the break. And we always made sure that our presentation was right after the coffee break. So all 8 cities, that bowl was empty by the time I went up on stage. And so I would get up on stage and I'd talk about our all our solutions and all that stuff. And then I'd say, you know what? I just got a new video from our marketing team this morning, and I had to submit this deck a week ago, but I really want to show it to you. And I would hold up one of those USB sticks and I'd call somebody from my team up to the stage and say, hey, can you just run this in the back and plug it in? They'd run in the back. And as they're doing that, I say, wait till you see this really cool video that we have. And they go back there and they're plugging in, and the people are out in the audience looking at me like, this is kind of a weird presentation. This guy would break it up just to show me this video. But let me see what okay, yeah, I would be yelling to the person in the back, yeah, you see that? There it is, the Inverse Tech, that USB stick I just gave you. There it is, the disaster demo videos. Click on that. And this button would click, and then boom, a scary red screen would pop up. And everybody in the audience, these are all IT providers, they would all look at me like, this dummy from Datto just came all the way down to Miami to give himself ransomware live on stage here, right? And so I'm yelling at my colleague and all these different types of things. And then I say, well, I took that USB stick from that woman. I see them all in front of you at your tables. You took them too, and she's long gone. And how do I know that? Because I hired her. And he never plugged anything in back there. This is just a video that I embedded into my deck. But I want to show you that you as an IT provider all fell for this. You took a USB stick from a stranger at an IT event. You didn't even go to look and see whether they're on the agenda. Just a person in there. If this had been a real virus, there's 200 of you in the crowd. If I got 100 of you to plug it in, and I just asked for $1,000, I just made $100,000. And what was my cost? A few $100s to this woman who didn't even know she was part of my criminal enterprise, right? A few $100s for the USB sticks and whatever I might have spent on the virus, and you would have never suspected it was me. And if you don't think this could happen, it just happened to a room full of IT providers, and you see everybody throw them on the floor. But again, these are real life stories. We've seen these type of stories where, it could be something simple. Black Hat, this large hacker conference, they meet out in Vegas every year. A few years ago, they just sprinkled USB sticks around the floor in Las Vegas, different casino floors. And they found that just over 50% of those got plugged back in. All it was doing was pinging back to say where it was plugged in. Who is picking up a USB stick in Las Vegas on the floor of a casino and plugging it in? Apparently 50% of the people that found them. And so, yeah, the criminals don't have to be overly creative to get through. And so at the end of the day, you're left with a couple of options. You can pay and pray that a response I mentioned earlier, where a lot of business owners say, okay, I'll just pay it. I can go set up a Bitcoin account. Now, we know the fluctuations. There's a lot of problems just in that. It's not like you can just go and set up a Bitcoin account and then immediately send out the exact money that they're looking for. But again, you're looking at sending money to somebody that you don't know, that has no real skin in the game. They probably want to move on to the next criminal, so they probably will unencrypt your data, but they might not. Or they, again, like I mentioned, they might say, well, okay, that was your down payment. Let's just keep seeing how much money I can get from them. But again, it also just comes down to the bully in the cafeteria kind of model of, if you're going to give me your lunch money once, I'm going to keep attacking you until you stop giving me that lunch money. So if you are now shown to the criminal world that you're a business that will pay this ransom, of course they're going to keep attacking you until you put protocols in place and processes in place to make sure that you don't get attacked. Because that's the option that most people are going down right now at the small business level, because they don't have the ability. The alternative to not paying is to recover from your backup. And we know our internal study shows it takes about 20 days on average from the moment a ransomware attack occurs to the moment that a company is completely business as usual back up and running. 20 days. And that's our internal study that we've done. I do a lot of presentations with governmental agencies, Department of Homeland Security, their number is 16.2 days. So pretty much in line. We're talking about weeks. And so that's what goes down into the second option, which is let's remediate that issue and recover. That's the real issue that you really need to go towards, because the government now is starting. They've always said not to pay the ransom, but they're now putting some teeth behind it. And they've got the Treasury Department put out a statement a couple of years ago saying that by paying the ransom, you're at risk of actually violating the law. Whereas paying a ransom in general is not illegal. Paying a ransomware attack may be illegal because a lot of times the folks behind these attacks, unfortunately, are terrorist organizations and they're enemy nation states. And so by paying that ransom, you could inadvertently be breaking the law by funding these folks. Now, there's not a lot of teeth behind it because, again, they have a really hard time tracking where that money goes because it's leaving in Bitcoin. But it shows you the direction the government's going in. Congress passed a law last year that if you do pay the ransom, you have to report that within 24 hours. So they want to make it so that the only way we win this on a macro level is to get businesses to stop paying. But at a micro level, in your business, when it's the choice of I either have to pay this or I have to be down for 20 days and I can't survive being down for 20 days, then of course you got to keep the doors open. So it comes down to that recovery, right? How long is it going to take you? If it's going to take you 20 days and the alternative is to pay $5,000 in ransom, chances are you're going to pay that $5,000 because the 20 days is going to vastly outweigh that $5,000. If you have a cyber resiliency plan in place where you could say, hey, I know I can recover in a matter of hours or maybe a day or so, now all of a sudden that math is back in your favor and you've got the leverage. But those at the end of the day are your two options. You pay and you hope to get your data back, or you go through the remediation route and you recover that data. And again, the math game is what those criminals want you to think about. They know that they're going to price this ransomware payment at a more attractive price than the alternative, which is to recover, if that recovery plan might take you 20 days. And that's why they're getting so many folks to pay. Now, we're also seeing some other things. We saw an uptick in these, and you've probably seen these. We see a lot more of these on a personal email type basis. But this scareware stuff. They'll find an old password that you have down the dark web, and there's some very easy scanning tools that I'm sure you could talk to Verity about, where you could do a dark web scan, and you'll see that almost every domain, anytime I've seen, and we're not in the business of it, so I'm not promoting anyone in particular, but I've seen these dark web scans, and just about 100% of the time, there is someone's email to that domain that they're searching for that's been compromised. And it could be an old password, but what these criminals will do is they'll find an old one that's on there, and they'll either post the entire password or they'll have a couple stars, ampersands up front, and say, here's your password. We now have all your passwords, and they scare you, even though they really don't. They scare you into thinking that, oh man, they might have every one of my passwords. They have this one old one that I have, and I don't have a password, policy, which most people do not, and it scares you. So even when they don't even have the attack, there's so much information for them to use. They're finding a lot of different ways to do that, to make money off of all these tools that they have. And so when you look at the way that we're going to win this fight, and there's a lot of different frameworks out there. We follow the NIST framework, and it's a very easy framework to follow. What I would just suggest is that at a minimum, understand what security framework your company is currently following and making sure you're adhering to it. And if you're not following a framework, pick one and adjust your cybersecurity and your incident response plan to match that. What NIST is basically saying is there's 5 steps to all of this, and it takes cybersecurity and kind of expands it into cyber resiliency. So your first step, especially after an educational thing like this, let's go identify what you have, where all of your data lives, who has access to all of these things, and from there you could put together a protection plan. There's no commodity here that's going to take care of that second step. There's no, I'm going to go buy a protection plan. It really needs to be customized to your environment. And it's an ever living and breathing document, because all those threats are going to consistently change. So those first 2 steps are your security side. And a lot of people spend a lot of time on that, and it's very important. But what happens on those next 3 steps? If something were to occur, how quickly are you detecting that? I mentioned when they get in there, they want to get their hands onto as many things as possible. How quickly are they able to do that? How quickly are you able to detect that? how quickly you're able to go in and respond to this, start isolating machines, start doing that reconnaissance, start bringing back that data so that you can start to recover. This is your full cyber resiliency plan. That those last three steps are really when that race begins between whether it's going to take you 20 days or 20 hours to recover, and the option then becomes clear whether you have to pay or not. So you really just have to make sure that identify process really begins, and understanding what's on your network. Where is that data? Data lives in a lot of different places now. It used to be simple. Everything lived on some on-premise Windows-based server somewhere. Now data lives in a lot of different places. So do we know where every piece of that data lives? Do we know who has access to all the different software as a service applications that we have? Do we understand the risks? Do we understand how we're protecting it both on the intrusion side of things, but also on the backup side of things? And what third party and fourth party vendors are involved in here? When we looked at that, if you remember the attack on Target store, the Target chain a few years back, it wasn't an attack on Target itself. It was on their HVAC vendor. So within that identification, you're putting together an incident response plan. You really need to be able to say, how am I vetting all the vendors I work with? What is my vetting process? If we're going to have any sort of shared resources here, and they have any sort of access to my data, how am I vetting them? And then on the protection side, multi-factor authentication. This is the simplest thing that eventually will be the law of the land. We all know multi-factor authentication to some extent. You log into your bank account. There's a push notification. Every time I sit down at my desk every day, I get an alert. So I got to push an alert to my phone, does facial recognition, and then I'm into my systems. Everybody should be turning them on. Again, it's not an expensive or a time-consuming thing. Just doing that alone, just implementing multi-factor authentication across all of your applications will reduce these attacks by 99%. And then understanding that network on the protection side of things, right? The intrusion protection, the intrusion detection, understanding your firewall configurations, all of those types of things. This would all go into that plan, because before you identify all those things, you cannot put a protection plan in place. I mentioned earlier too about giving carte blanche admin access to everybody. Apply that least privilege. Make sure that everyone has access to what they need, but that they only have access to the tools that they need. And you will go through and do an inventory of where all these applications live and who has access to them. Make sure that's documented. That will come in handy on the compliancy side of things as well as any sort of, if you're going to look for cybersecurity insurance, they're going to want to see this. So get ahead of the game. And then, we know that email is how these folks are getting through. That's your number one threat factor. So what are you doing on your spam filtering? What services are you using? What SaaS application you're using there? And then understanding that training is the key part. All the technologies in the world are great. They will never be able to protect you 100% because the vast majority of attacks occur because of end user error. It's somebody clicking on an email they're not supposed to. The vast majority of attacks. They're not relying on brute force attacks, these criminals. They're relying on human error. And most of that comes down to training and not having those processes and all those things in place. So it has to be constantly monitored. You need to be able to answer that question. Who is monitoring these attacks? Because again, these criminals are opportunistic. They will attack the Friday before a 3-day weekend because they know typically people aren't on high alert over the weekends. That gives them a full weekend to go in and get their hands on as many things as possible. Make sure that you have these. These are obviously critical for your cyber resiliency plan, but again, goes back to that insurance compliance discussion as well. And then what is that response plan? If your fire alarm goes off in your building as you're listening to this webinar, hopefully everybody knows what to do. Does everybody in your organization know if they get that scary red screen to pop up, who they're supposed to call, what those next steps are? Who do they call? What are the next steps in terms of filing a claim? All of those different types of things. The one big takeaway from all of this, if you go through the process and put together an incident response plan, you will be vastly more prepared. Before you do anything in terms of technology, is putting that plan together. And then ultimately, what does that recovery process look like? Your goal here, again, that clock starts ticking the moment they have encrypted all of your files. How quickly can you get your entire team up and running into a true production environment so that an attack doesn't become a snow day where, hey, everybody gets to go home, but no, we're going to have you have access to all the systems that you need so that you could run your business as usual. It's not going anywhere. It is continuing to grow and evolve, and we're seeing attacks on Microsoft 365 now. So as we start to move our data off-prem, they will find ways to get to it. They're coming at it at a lot of different angles. It's an asymmetrical battle for sure. But again, if you look at any of these attacks, The worst thing that could happen is you just throw your hands up and say, hey, the US government was attacked. What chance do I have? And every one of these attacks, when you go and do the forensics, you could find the gap that was there. So if you put a plan in place, let these criminals go follow the path of least resistance and go let them attack the 70% of business owners who are not watching webinars like this and taking these things seriously, and be part of the 30%, because again, it's a numbers game to them. If you could show them some resistance up front, they will, they'll move along and they'll go to the next one because they're just trying to get to their numbers. And then, identify, whatever framework you want to choose, whether it's NIST or one of the other frameworks, identify it, choose it, and then follow that along as you're putting together that incident response plan. So with that, Liz, I know we're going to open up to some Q&A, so feel free to jump in or chime in with any other thoughts you might have.
Yes, we did have a question roll in while you were kind of talking about it, but we'll address it again. Our first one was, can ransomware spread through your entire network?
Yes, it can. Yeah, once it gets in, whatever you have access to, it's going to find its way there and lock it up. Again, that goes back to that admin discussion. There's a variant out there right now that's attacking Microsoft 365, and basically it's locking up all of your emails, and it's pretty cruel because it'll just show you the subject line of the email so that you really want to click on it because it's important, but you can't because everything's encrypted. If you have admin access, it now can do that same attack throughout the whole domain. So yes, it will not just be isolated to your machine. Any other sort of shared drive that you have or server that you have access to, it'll find its way there and it'll encrypt that data. So not to scare you, but yeah.
Not to scare you, but
yeah, right.
The second question that came in, are you ever fully protected from ransomware?
No, unfortunately. And I know it's a cliche term of, it's not if, but when, but it's true. And the government will tell you that. No one's going to tell you that this piece of technology is going to 100% protect you and your business, because again, the majority of these attacks occur because of user error, even multi-factor authentication, which is great. I mean, it does such a good job. It still relies on you as the human to get that alert and say, yes, this is me. And there are real life stories of people implementing multi-factor authentication, not going through the trainings, not even really knowing what it was, getting an alert on their phone and it says, did you just try to sign in? And people hit yes. So it's still you physically doing it. The technology did its job. It's saying, hey, somebody odd is trying to log in this. Is this you? Log into this. And so no, you're never fully protected from it because they're going to find sneaky ways to get in.
Awesome. Thank you so much for answering those questions. We are out of time, but thank you so much, Mike. You are an amazing presenter, and thank you everybody for joining. As thought leaders in the IT industry, we do host monthly webinars throughout the entire year. So stay tuned for an invite for our next month's webinar. And thank you so much again, everyone, for joining. And we hope you have a productive day.
Thanks, everybody.